Hello everyone, welcome to the Worldviews podcast. My name is Hansong Li and I teach at American University in the School of International Service. And today I'm so happy to be joined by my esteemed colleague Akbar. Professor Akbar Ahmed was the High Commissioner to the UK and Ireland, but he's also a poet, a philosopher, and a historian. Today we will talk about South Asia, the unfolding situations there, but also more generally we're going to talk about the international society and the world order, as well as the role of Islam in it. So welcome, Akbar.
Thank you so much, Professor Hansong. It's a great honor for me to be on this podcast and I look forward to our session.
Yeah, it's great that we are here right outside our offices, and we have some cultural relics from the late Professor Abdulaziz Said. And this is an Islamo-centric world map, and every time we have a guest, especially from the Muslim world, I would challenge them to identify at least Mecca, Medina for me, and it usually takes about 2 or 3 minutes before they realize that this is an inversed world map, and then they start looking for the Caspian Sea and South Asia and Central Asia. But it kind of reminds us that knowledge systems are relative and we have different ways of representing the world, just as we have this globe here, which is a little bit different in terms of how the world is seen. And indeed, today we're going to talk about different ways of looking at the international society.
I'm delighted that we are neighbors. We are neighbors at American University where you teach and I teach. We are also connected through a larger link, which is the famous motto, Chini, Pakistani, bye-bye. And I was reminded of that when I visited China a couple of years back. And the affection I got from just average, ordinary Chinese was just staggering. Because I went as part of a delegation, an American delegation.
Right.
Very high powered. There was a senator and a lieutenant general and a congressman. And I would be singled out every time by our Chinese host. And at times they would literally mob me and I was either the Yeti or some strange creature had come from across the Himalayas. Oh, Pakistani. And they'd want selfies and pictures with me. So I realized that there was a depth of feeling which wasn't artificial. They weren't making it. I was, of course, also invited to Peking University. I spoke to the departments, the deans. They all welcomed me and they all said, come and visit on your time and do some research in Xinjiang or whichever part you want of China, which I promised to do at some stage, so we must talk about that also.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was curious about your trip to China as well. I saw some pictures, you were on the Great Wall.
Yes.
And I was curious, you are part of the American delegation, but you're also Pakistani.
Yes.
And of course, your journey can be summarized as from Waziristan to Washington, but also there are many stops in between, right?
Yes.
And we have these cultural relics from Professor Abdulaziz Said, whose own journey, I guess, how would we put it, from Amuda to Aleppo and then to Washington, was equally legendary, and I think you crossed paths with each other.
He was on the committee that hired me, so I always had very high regard for him and reverence for him. But as far as China is concerned, Professor Hansong, what I discovered was that there are so many layers of the Chinese reaction to outsiders. One is the historic one, the Middle Kingdom, the Central Kingdom looking at the world outside, and the concentric circles around China. Then there's the current US-China relationship. Then there's the relationship that China has with allies or friends like Pakistan. And that relationship to me is very important because Pakistan has been able to play a historic role. In fact, as you know, bringing the US and China together, Pakistan played a key role because Kissinger, if you recall, went to Islamabad, gave the announcement that he's ill. He had curry, was very hot curry, and he had to rest for the night and not. But secretly, he was flown to China. They set up the meeting, and then Nixon followed. So you suddenly had literally the geopolitical map of the world changing. And again, Pakistan had a role to play and I think will continue to play a role. And I think the Chinese are aware and I think the Americans are aware that that's a very useful bridge between the West and the East.
Yeah, absolutely. And can we zoom in a little bit on South Asia? Because much is going on at the moment. And of course, Professor Yunus right now is in China and he's meeting with the Chinese president. And there was a sense that Bangladesh is also moving in different directions. But of course, Bangladesh has always been playing a very complex regional role. And what do we make sense of what's happening there? I mean, on the one hand, we still have the Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh, and USAID is stopping
Yes.
now. And of course, then Bangladesh's own political turmoil, and it's kind of looking for a path forward. What is your assessment of the situation there?
I look at it this way, Professor Hansong, that the world, and it really needs to be a global perspective, the world is right now at a point of great uncertainty. You've got what John Mearsheimer talks about, great power rivalry, the four hegemons, three and a half if you like, India emerging as the fourth one. But if you notice that the hegemons are basically the two great powers in Asia, that's China and India, which were always, according to scholars like Kishore Mehbubani, were always the center of wealth, political strength and coherence, and history. That's China and India for 1800 years. And then the last 200 years, the last 2 centuries, you had colonization and European powers then taking over, slicing bits and pieces, and eventually completely dominating India and dominating large parts of China. So in a sense, history is correcting itself. That leaves 2 hegemons, America, which so many people are talking about in terms of the decline of American power. I don't see it as a decline. I still think there's a lot of vitality and a lot of strength in America, and it'll continue to make a great impact, but it doesn't have that supreme hegemon role that it had for the last half century. Then you have Russia, and Putin has to decide which way Russia is going to proceed. That leaves one big player, potentially, and that's the world of Islam. And that always fascinates me because you've got the 4 hegemons, they're easily identified. Go back to the 19th century when you had the great power rivalry, imperial powers. You had China, Britain, Imperial Britain, Imperial Russia, 3 great powers, playing their games, the great game, in Central Asia. But you also had the Ottomans, that was the Muslim power. Today you don't have that, so there's no great Muslim power, no Muslim hegemon. You've got mid-level powers like Turkey or Pakistan or Iran, but no great powers. So in the future, when you look at the world map, if you see the world today in terms of short-term perspective, short-term meaning what may be happening in the next 6 months, 1 year, few years from now, the chances are that the US and China, unless they manage their relationship, which is quite frightening. To me, it's quite frightening. You've got all these planes and ships almost missing each other in the South China Sea, and now you've got this Greenland situation where Trump wants to take over Greenland. You've got the Russians and the Chinese also exploring the Arctic. So it's a very dangerous world. It can just literally trigger off the Third World War. Then you've got the long-term perspective, which will depend on the short term. If there's no world war, and we come to the long-term perspective, then you've got to understand that we are in the middle of a climate crisis. It's no longer theory, it's no longer scientists sitting in some labs. You have wildfires in California, you've got earthquakes in Myanmar and Thailand, you've got floods in the UK happening now. Climate change is happening. So unless the world understands, we face it and we deal with it together as a world community, we are not going to be able to manage it. It may already be too late. Then you have the wars and the violence. And there's no let up on that. You've got wars in Europe, you've got wars in the Middle East, you may have a war with Iran and I hope not, but all these are straws in the wind. These things are happening and could be happening. Then you mentioned South Asia. I'm from South Asia. I was born in India. My parents migrated when I was a small boy to Pakistan. So I'm very much a Pakistani now. And I see that these 2 neighbors with so much in common, there's so much culture and so much history, there's also a lot of bad blood because they fought 3 wars. Now when neighbors have fought 3 wars and both are nuclear and both are constantly threatening each other, I know that many cabinet ministers and generals are constantly threatening Pakistan that we'll wipe you out, we'll use the nuclear option that we have. The Pakistanis are then defensive and they say, we will also use it. And when I look back and I say, my God, it would be sheer madness, because who will they kill? Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, these are all people who live together and have so much in common. So where do you draw the line? Where do you say, I'm going to kill the enemy and only the enemy? All the great founding fathers of India and Pakistan, Mahatma Gandhi in India, Nehru in India, Jinnah in Pakistan, Quaid-e-Azam, Liaquat Ali Khan, all of them would have been appalled and horrified at the idea of this mass slaughter. All of them. Because they were all repelled by what happened in 1947, which was the very brutal, bloody partition of India. So that scares me, because number one, of the danger of these two neighbors both threatening each other, and number two, the general indifference of the world. The world is so ethnocentric. So if you look at the American media, if you look at CNN and Fox or whatever, it's completely focused on America and American needs, American developments, and right now it's just Trump and nothing but
Now
Trump.
we're in the age of asking not what the U.S. can do for the world, but asking what the world can do for the U.S.
Yes.
So all the more.
It's just focused.
Yeah.
So if you see it that way, they're not interested in what's happening outside. They're not interested in Asia or India or Pakistan. They know so little about India and Pakistan that it frightens me.
Yeah.
And that's 1/4 of humanity.
Yeah. And one thing that disappoints me about the discourse, even though as it moves towards the so-called Indo-Pacific, is that India is treated as a deterrent against China, but not in virtue of its own interest and not in virtue of its own normative power, its own what it has to offer in
Yes.
terms of ideas. Certainly that's how we treat Islam, as a security situation, not in terms of what Islam can offer. Right?
But that's because things are seen through the perspective of the West looking at Asia.
Yeah.
But if you look at India, for example, and its relationship with China, as I see it, as someone who's grown up in that part of the world, I grew up in one of my first postings was in Mansehra. Now, just outside the assistant commissioner's house, I was assistant commissioner, you had one of the rocks of Ashoka, a stupa,
Right.
who's a Buddhist, who converted to Buddhism.
Yes.
Now, I know that Chinese scholars like Huan Sang and Fa Hien came from China, Buddhists, looking for Buddhist origins and relics and literature.
Right.
So there was a very deep historic connection. I know that, for example, a Chinese emperor wrote a beautiful poem in honor of the Prophet of Islam. These things are not known outside. And these are the things that strengthened the coherence of Chinese society. The notion of Confucius and Tao in their philosophies, respect for elders, respect for stability, respect for the king must be respected in his own right, the father in his own. Everyone must have their own respect and place in society. Respect for nature, respect for exams, and some sense of meritocracy. These are great virtues which have proved to provide a kind of stability to China in spite of the turbulence. That's been the ballast that provided the stability. Similarly, in India, you have these great concepts of ahimsa. Now, ahimsa means non-violence. It comes very deep from India. This is going back to Jainism, again going back to Buddhism. You have the concept of shanti, of peace. And these are some of the ideas and virtues that leaders and scholars like Mahatma Gandhi were promoting. Of course, you saw the result. He was shot in the end because he wanted to embrace even the minorities. Someone shot him because they said, that's not good enough. This land must only be for our people. And the irony is, and again as a scholar observing things in South Asia, that today the title Mahatma means the great soul. Maha-Atma, great
Mahatma,
soul.
yes.
That is applied to the murderer of Gandhi. So the man who shot Gandhi is now called Mahatma, that he's the great individual. So there are many challenges facing this part of the world. The most dangerous will be if the leaders are prepared to press the button and blow everything up. And I think that awareness needs to come, particularly in the West, where people are almost indifferent to what's happening in the rest of on the rest of the planet.
And when you mentioned the interfaith pasts that connected different parts of Asia, I was thinking that in my seminar this semester, I'm assigning a very interesting piece to my students to read about the Tang Emperor Dezong's comment on a particular translation of the Satparamita, which was a collaborative exercise between an historian Christian called Adam from eastern Iranian parts of Eurasia, and then there was a Prajna from present-day Afghanistan who was contributing to that translation as well. The emperor wasn't happy about the translation, but then he explained the reason why he thinks that Buddhism and Christianity were mixed up. But I think, even if the verdict was negative, there was that moment, right, of internormative,
Yes.
inter-civilizational engagement that we don't quite see nowadays. But that brings me to my question of why you said that we fell short at the end, but what still will be the point of connection now? Is it some kind of panism? When we think of the great moment of the founding and the anti-colonial, post-colonial state building in the region, South Asia and Southeast Asia, we think of maybe at first in the 1920s anti-imperial leads, and in the immediate aftermath of the war there was some pan-Asianist movements, and then there was the Bandung moment, and then somehow the internationalism fell short at the end. What happened to it, and how can we redeem that or build something different?
I think, Hansong, that we really have to, the scholars and the thinkers, have to move beyond these paradigms, colonialism, post-colonialism, anti-colonialism. They're there, they were valid, but we have to move on to a completely different paradigm. And because this material world has failed us, this world where materialism is so rampant, consumerism is so rampant, that the younger generation literally has nothing to instruct them or teach them or guide them except their little iPhones and the media, the social media, which is very dangerous. According to all psychologists, it's very harmful to people. What can we then in South Asia or Asia offer? China has much to offer. It's got great philosophies, ancient philosophies, great philosophies. I just mentioned Confucius, for example, the basic principle of treat others as you want them to treat you. This is so important. When you look at the world today, that's exactly what you need. More empathy for your neighbor, more empathy for people who are not like you. Similarly, South Asia, India, Pakistan have so much to offer. I mentioned Shanti, I mentioned Ahimsa, I mentioned the great traditions. For example, I'll give you two examples in South Asia, which includes India and Pakistan. One is Dara Shikoh, one of my favorite historical characters. He was the crown prince of the Mughal Empire, son of the Mughal Emperor Shah Jahan, who built the Taj Mahal. So people may not know Dara Shikoh, but they'll know the Taj Mahal. So this young man becomes the crown prince, and he's going to be ruling India. And he's a great scholar, he's a great philosopher, he's bringing people together. He translates the Hindu text for the first time into Persian, and then eventually they'll be translated into European languages and make a huge impact on European philosophy, like Schopenhauer, for example. He gets his philosophy from Dara Shikoh's work. At the same time, he's redefining how Islam needs to be looked at that time. We're going back to the 17th century. So he is talking about an inclusive, warmly embracing Islam that takes in the vision of a universal world. Because he's saying the God of the Muslims is a God that embraces all of humanity. Some people don't like that, and his younger brother, who's the general in charge of the army, doesn't like it at all. So he fights his elder brother, defeats him, and then institutes a case against him that he's guilty of heresy, of leaving the faith, and he's then killed, he's executed. But there's that example of Dara Shikoh. Before him, you have the example of Dara Shikoh's ancestor Akbar. Akbar the Great. He's called Akbar the Great because he's 16th century, and think of what he's doing. At the time when in Europe, Henry VIII is not only chopping up his wives, but chopping up by 70, 80,000 Protestants and Catholics, the terrible wars that take place in Europe. Akbar is bringing people together. He has a weekly official meeting which he presides over in Fatehpur Sikri, this new city that he's created, where Christians, Jews, Hindus, mystics meet for long discussions on religion. And he listens to them. He allows everyone to speak because he says that ultimately these are divine paths to the same being. We are all looking for the same spiritual salvation or spiritual nourishment. Fatehpur Sikri, the new city he creates, he has this huge entrance. It's called the Baland Darwaza, which means the grand entrance, one of the greatest in Europe, in Asia, either China or India. And across the entrance, he has one quote. Now think of the significance. The most powerful Mughal ruler, Akbar the Great, very powerful Mughal ruler, very rich empire. He has one quote, and that quotation is from Jesus Christ. It says, "This world is a bridge. Build not upon it. Pass lightly over it." Now this is very much against the philosophy of wild, rampant capitalism. This world is not a bridge, but gather everything you can, grab your neighbor's property, grab your friend's property, just build, and make lots of money and care for nothing else except materialism. So there is a philosophic kernel, I don't mean the military kernel, but I mean the core, that we can learn from these ancient civilizations, because as Mehbubani, as Kevin Rudd and all these scholars of China and India pointed out, the world is tilting back to Asia. And I think Asia needs to step up and offer what it needs to offer and not behave like European powers who, as we know, in the 20th century, Europe led us into 2 world wars, 100 million people dead. So we have to learn lessons from Europe's history and try to improve on that and therefore create a new paradigm.
You highlighted some important civilizational moments, the Ashokan moment, the Akbari moment. I mean, of course, in the European context, you also wrote about the Andalusian moment.
Yes.
These are not perfect moments, historically speaking, but then you were highlighting the potential of learning something from how to understand between and across cultures and civilizations, which, I mean, it doesn't translate directly to a set of institutions, but it kind of breathes life into institutions, right? Otherwise, you have dry institutions that may or may not work, because after all, it's the humans who are running society.
And you have to adapt ideas that are coming not necessarily from your society, from other societies. You mentioned Andalusia. Now, as you know, I did a lot of work. I've got a film and a book, Journey into Europe. And one thing I learned was that Andalusian society, that's Spain and Portugal, they created this culture, which the Spanish now, looking back, call la convivencia, which means coexistence. So it's not a question of I'm tolerating you, because that has this, the implication of patronage. But coexistence, you have your own culture, I have my own, I respect your culture, I want to learn about you and you learn about me. So it's mutual respect. It's a very important concept. And I'm looking at Europe as we traveled for this project, and we saw the tension in the process of immigration and process of the emergence of the right wing, the emergence of the cases of terrorism, the cases of Islam's presence in Europe. Europe's population is going down. Immigrants are increasing the tension there, so what will the future hold? There's already violence there. And I said, as I traveled in Europe, I said again and again, have you guys in university campuses, talking to senior officials, have you heard of your own concept, European concept of la convivencia? And I was shocked to find that not many people knew about it. So here's a European crisis. This is what's happening now with the immigration process and so on. And here's a European solution, la convivencia. And yet people don't know about it. So I really believe that at this moment in history, scholars can play even a small role, but they can play a role in hoping to throw some light and some, I think, illumination on a fairly dark landscape.
Yeah, that's very interesting, because nowadays in scholarship we talk about comparative politics, comparative theory, and you are engaged in interfaith dialogues, but sometimes we often don't even harken back to our own traditions, and then let alone, of course, dialogue in between traditions. You mentioned the role of Islam, and you mentioned how previously underserved communities are not just norm receivers, idea receivers, but they should also offer their own wisdoms. And I wonder, Islam, taking Islam as an example, what can it offer to inspire us to rethink the questions that you mentioned, the climate on the one hand, human relations with nature, if we can put it in a more philosophical way. On the other hand, this fractured geopolitical landscape, and the question of nuclear dangers and armament and disarmament. What can we learn from that? Because some of your readers would say, well, it's very nice that we have the Ashokan and Akbari examples. It's very nice that we can look back onto the Andalusian moment. But do these ancient, early modern paradigms offer us something specific on how to guide us forward and how to think otherwise?
That is a great question. In fact, as you know, I've been engaged in trying to answer it. I'm not sure they've got the answer. But I go back to the origins of Islam. And two things strike me. The rapidity with which it emerges from Arabia, desert, not played any role in history, and suddenly, within a couple of decades, it's in Spain and it's in Sindh, in India, right across the world. And what is it giving the world? It's giving the world culture and astronomy and mathematics and algebra and literally creating a new world of scholarship and learning. And I analyzed it in great detail, what explains that rapid rise, and then centuries later, what explains its slow, inexorable decline, which we are in right now. So what can Islam offer? I think Islam can offer a great deal. It is, first of all, a bridge between the West and the East, between China and India and the West. Right. It's a very important geographical, conceptual, cultural bridge. Yeah. And if you look at the rise of Islam and the decline and ask what happened, the answer is the same. The answer is what I call the ilm ethos. Ilm is the word for knowledge. Ethos is the ethos and the spirit that permeates society. So if you look at that first part of Islam, the first century or so, you'll be struck by how the rulers of Islam, the scholars of Islam respected knowledge. So the man of knowledge, if you are a professor in the Muslim world, literally this happened to dozens of examples. You're born in Spain, you may end up as a top professor in Delhi or in Cairo, because that's the respect they have for you.
That's how Ibn Battuta could land in a foreign place but be respected immediately.
Wherever he went, he was made a qazi and given honors and a house. Because a professor cannot work on his own, he must have some backing in order to be left alone to work. Number one. Number two, when this ilm ethos began to decline, as it began in the 16th, 17th, 18th century, now whatever the reasons, whether it's colonization, whether the loss of vitality, whether tyrannical rulers, but it did decline. So in order for us to recover the Muslim world, to recover the ilm ethos, we have to identify there are three key features in the ilm ethos. Number one is the notion of knowledge, ilm. Ilm is the first notion. And ilm is coming from the Quranic injunction. The most used word in the Quran is ilm, or knowledge. The most used word. God, 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 and then ilm. And Muslims are told again and again, look at the heavens, look at the stars, and acquire knowledge. Go to China, there's a very famous saying, go to China to acquire knowledge. Now for the 7th century Muslim in Arabia, to go to China was like going to go to Mars to get knowledge, because so far physically and travel was so difficult. The second feature, second pillar is adl, or justice. We must have justice. If I don't have justice, I'll never be happy. If my land is not safe, if my family is not safe, if I don't get justice from my rulers. So this is the second. Take a look at the Muslim world today. Take a look at the non-Muslim world today and see where's the justice. Take a look at the Muslim minorities. Wherever they are not getting the justice that they deserve. And the third, again, lack of this in the Muslim world, is ihsan, or compassion. God has again and again said, you're human beings, you have a very high status. Love one another, treat one another with respect and with compassion. So, to answer your question, Muslim scholars and Muslim rulers need to first rediscover their own ilm ethos and try to recreate it. And I think that people in the non-Muslim world, whether they're Chinese or Indians or Westerners, West Americans or Europeans, will all respond to these three features. Every society wants knowledge, justice, and a sense of compassion. And what I'm seeing is, because there's so much emphasis on materialism now, in these developed societies or overdeveloped societies, the notion of compassion has almost disappeared. You'll hear terrible stories of people who are in real trouble, in dire straits, and no one bothers about them. Youngsters are throwing out their elders from their homes. They're retiring them, sending them to retirement homes. People are committing suicide on a massive scale. Families are, husband, wives are divorcing. I think half the marriages end in divorce in the West. There may be 100,000 murders every year taking place in America. 80, 90,000 suicides. These are very, very high numbers and should be alarming anyone who is concerned about society. So this is where I think Islam has a role to play if people know about it and if Muslims are able to talk about it, because they don't. A lot of the time, Muslims still see it in terms of the traditional colonial phase, that, we are in this condition because of the West, because the West colonized us and is colonizing us.
Very interesting that you gave us this trivarga of the trio, the kind of the three-way understanding of Islamic quest of flourishing, really. It is a vision for flourishing, justice, and knowledge, justice, and compassion. I can see parallels in Greek thought, right?
Yeah.
It's deeply Socratic, the quest of knowledge, to know ourselves and know ourselves, I guess, through in the light of others. And you mentioned how between South Asia and China there is this drive to know yourself by going to the other.
Yes.
And that is quite interesting how it is by partaking in the reasonings of others that we can even find our true selves, not just to be introspective.
And the importance of knowledge and books. Andalusia, we talked about Andalusia. Cordoba was the capital of Andalusia. Cordoba had, 1,000 years ago, 93 libraries. And the main library had 600,000 books. When the largest library in Europe then had 600 books. So the scale was completely different. That's the time when Muslims are discovering planets. That's why so many of the planets are named after Muslims. Ibn Rushd has a crater on the moon named after him. Ibn Farnas has a crater on the moon named after him. He's the man who attempted flight. He's the first man to attempt flight. If you go to Cordoba today, there's a bridge in the shape of wings named after him. There are airports in the Arab world named after Ibn Farnas. And he's a scientist, mathematician, very much a Renaissance man before the term is used in Europe. So we need to understand that there are certain basic features which are important to society. It's not all about me, and me making money. It's about me and my community and my people, which includes people who are not like me, who may think differently, who may have a different color and a different race. We need to embrace them all.
The one unsocratic part of this story is that whereas Socrates never left the city of Athens, never ventured out of the city walls, the most he did was sitting under a tree outside the city walls. What's striking about Islamic thinkers in the past is that they move across politics.
Yes.
And I think if I have to say one thing nice about Karl Jasper's theory of the ideal age is that he did realize it is through increased mobility that these thinker rhetoricians were able to go around and compare notes. And certainly that's true of Professor Said here, is true of you here, and you were in Europe, in the UK, here in the US. I see Jesus College, Cambridge on your tie. And interestingly, my tie is not, it matches yours, but this is from Waseda University in Japan. So it's how interesting
Very, very similar, and I'm delighted to see that, again, an echo of the similarities of this world.
Yes, and Le Rouge et le Noir,
yes,
is the novel in our two ties. Do you have any final words for us before we
Yes, I'd
disperse?
like, with your permission, to read a favorite poem of mine, written by one of the greatest Sufi figures, a mystic, very famous man, called Ibn Arabi. He's called Sheikh al-Akbar, that is the greatest Sheikh. Controversial man, because not everyone believes in embracing the world and promoting this love and harmony. Today he's enjoying a revival because Turkey has a famous series on the Ottomans, and it features Ibn Arabi. So Turkey has, as it were, revived this. So if you go to the Middle East or to Pakistan, people will know about Ibn Arabi through this television series. So I just want to read this as a final comment, with your permission. So the poem is, my heart has become able to take on all forms. It is a pasture for gazelles, for monks and abbey. It is a temple for idols, and for whoever circumambulates it, the Kaaba. It is the tablets of the Torah, and also the leaves of the Quran. I believe in the religion of love, whatever direction its caravans may take, for love is my religion and my faith.
That's wonderful. Yeah. And love was indeed the philosophical principle that united so many traditions in Akbari South Asia and certainly in Western philosophy and Chinese philosophy as well.
Yes. And they believed the principal philosophic motto then was Sul-e-Kul. Sul-e-Kul means peace with all. You embrace the world, and that is Ibn Arabi's philosophy.
That's wonderful. And let's hope that there's more of the ethos of love in international justice, and hopefully in this reordering of international society, we'll see more of that ethos there and not just the brutal logic of loss and benefit. Yeah. And thank you so much, Akbar, for this conversation and for this beautiful poem recital that reminds all of us of the place of love in international politics. And we have many conversations, but this one is particularly stimulating for me. And thank you so much for joining us, our audience. We look forward to see you next time in the Worldviews podcast.